it doesn't just build their personal brand and what they're known for when they kind of leverage LinkedIn in the right way and become a leading voice on the platform. It then amplifies everything else that they do. So
Mhm.
if they are showcasing or they've got in their experience section or they're talking about those partnerships, those companies that they're involved in or a foundation that they might support, if they've got that represented on their profile, they all start to benefit because the eyes then that are on his profile then go to all of those things that he's involved in. And the more that he shares in, again, a human way, a way that resonates with people, they will start to then go through that pathway of, hey, I've looked at his profile. I didn't know he was involved in this. Let me look at that. And so I think it amplifies everything else that they're involved in and all the other brands or partnerships who then benefit from their kind of their reputation, right? And their personal brand.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Elevate Collection podcast. We are so excited to be here today with our friend John Lyndon. John is the founder and CEO of the Lyndon Consulting Company, where he works with professional athletes and executives to build leading voices, brands, and businesses on LinkedIn. After a decade of working at LinkedIn, John now spends his time focused in the sports industry and how they show up on LinkedIn. He's also the author of the book, The Professional Athlete's Guide to Building Your Brand on LinkedIn. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
We're so happy you're here and we love to dive straight into it. How did you get into this line of work? Like where did this all start?
Yeah, good question. So I spent 10 years working at LinkedIn here in Toronto, and I had various roles while I was there. A lot of the time that I spent was actually on the data side. So helping companies and leaders use LinkedIn data to make decisions. And I had started to see this opportunity kind of arise on LinkedIn with the sports industry and how athletes were starting to use LinkedIn to build their brands and talk about everything that they were creating or building or investing in outside of sport. And I left LinkedIn at the beginning of last year to start a consulting studio that had a focus on the sports industry with sports teams, orgs, the athletes themselves on kind of how they thought about their brand and how they built their brand outside of their main arena, right? Outside of where people know them best. As we've all kind of seen this kind of change, right, recently with athletes starting to investing in sports teams or in the technology startups. They are creating foundations and nonprofits about causes they care about or becoming founders and executives at organizations. And I wanted to help them build those things, right? And be involved in kind of them telling their story. So that's where I spend most of my time now and kind of how I started in it. As I'd been at LinkedIn for such a long time and have been part of that kind of acceleration of growth in how LinkedIn was used or seen or leveraged. And so I find it a fascinating kind of conversation and topic.
Well, we love that so much. And what you're doing is something that we definitely believe in here at the Elevate Collection. We love to tell the stories of how athletes are using their influence to create a legacy. And that's exactly what you're helping them do. So kudos to you, John.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to see what you guys are doing. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast so far.
Well, we're happy that you're here with us because I think that there's a lot of misconception around the idea of a personal brand and that it can appear to be almost like vapid or vain. Like, what are your perceptions on people that are starting to create the personal brand and they're starting with that before anything else?
Yeah, I think the entire conversation around it is changing still. And even the perception of it and the misconceptions hopefully are starting to change in that building a personal brand isn't an ego play, right? I think we've typically thought of it as that at times, especially on certain social media platforms and when celebrities or athletes post, a lot of it is unrelatable, right? And so we don't really bring it into that conversation of, oh, you're building a personal brand. We see it as they're posting their kind of their best life. And so how do we kind of move someone's personal brand from being completely unrelatable to most people to very relatable, right? And how do they humanize themselves in that building of a personal brand? And I think if you take the example of an athlete who's well known, still currently playing and performing, and in social media, they are kind of known in that world, right? And they do have a brand within the sports arena. But then if they start to enter into becoming a sports investor, or they invest in a startup, or they create a foundation, they're not as well known in that, but they can be so much more relatable and human to everyone else who's also doing those things and creating their own brands as you guys do, as I do. And so I think that's where I'm seeing the conversation change around personal brand. Is how do we move it from unrelatable to very relatable, and how do we build kind of relational and kind of reputational capital, right? If that makes sense.
Absolutely. What would you say is one of the biggest benefits to humanizing themselves to their fandom?
Yeah, I think it's a way to engage with people and really help people understand who you are and what you actually care about, right? And so that kind of relational aspect to it, kind of relatable part that brings people into a story. There's so many amazing examples of athletes who have started foundations about causes they deeply care about. And when they start to talk about those things, there's so many people who care about those things as well. And so it brings them into who that person is and kind of what they've had to go through in life, or more about them and their family and what they care about kind of outside of what they're known for, whether that be sport or entertainment or something else. And so I think that's really important, right? In kind of that storyline and how we humanize ourselves. And the benefits of doing that is that you get to engage with people on a human level, and connect with the right people that you want kind of in your community.
So you are basically connecting these dots here. And so oftentimes we see that, let's say an athlete, right, will start its own business, his or her own business, or their own charity or
Hmm.
foundation. They start these things and they believe, because of the level or status that they have reached, let's say it being the NFL, being I've reached the status of
Yeah,
NFL player, so I'm gonna start this business or I'm gonna start this foundation and it's gonna immediately be successful. And then it's not.
yeah.
Where where do you come in to connect the dot between the foundation or business and the athlete or entertainer, whomever it is, reaching that level of what we consider to be notable at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point, because we see it often. We see that play out. That story that you've just kind of mentioned of, you know, I'm well known in this arena. That should mean that I'm successful in everything else that I do. And we don't often see that kind of correlate or play out that way, because they haven't built the reputational capital in those other areas.
That's
And so,
that's down.
you know,
Hold on. Okay.
reputational capital, and what I kind of mean by that is the currency of trust, right? In different places, different audiences, different communities. They built that in the sport that they play, or if they're in talent or entertainment, they built that in certain spaces, but it doesn't guarantee that you have it everywhere, right? And so I hopefully help them kind of close that gap in getting them into the rooms that they need to be in front of the people that they need to build community with, and really kind of elevating or amplifying their voice in the spaces they aren't currently. And so, I think for someone who's well known, and let's say in the NFL or the NBA, what it does give them a lot of time is access. It gives them access to opportunity, but it doesn't give them the success from that opportunity. So that's where I think you have to build in that reputation, you have to build that trust, you have to build the credibility, and you have to lean on kind of how you build connections and real relationships with people. And that's, I think, the gap that currently is kind of pretty wide, but it's also represents the opportunity that's there. And so we can't just rely on, I'm well known on Instagram or in my sport, and that guarantees me everything else. We still have to play in other spaces and and build that credibility everywhere and where it's most important.
Up until this point, would you say that you're receiving these calls and these, invitations to work with them proactively, or at a point where they're like, I haven't gotten picked up this season. I need a job. I need to do something. I'm launching something and it's failed. Like, at what point are you receiving them as a client, like up until this point?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's some where it's me being proactive and seeing, what athletes are involved in, what they're building, what they're creating. I want to be part of those, those things that they're doing, which is really exciting. And sometimes I'm getting that inbound of, hey, I haven't figured out how to do this yet, right? And I need the right people around me. And I spoke to an athlete that you work with. Can we have a conversation, right? And so there's a lot of that kind of referral from other athletes that I've worked with, that then they're having the conversations and then coming to me, which is great and exciting. And I love having those conversations with people who do want to build something, right? That do have that kind of entrepreneur spirit about them and want to create something outside of sport. That will mean that their transition outside of sport, whenever that comes and whenever that happens, is so much easier, right? Their identity isn't wrapped up in one thing, but they have multiple things that they can then kind of build upon.
Yeah. Now, getting back to the LinkedIn portion of it, which I think is really interesting. You've seen, at least I've seen, and I think kind of chit chat about it, but let's say
Yeah.
OBJ has taken some initiative when it comes to his presence on LinkedIn and providing more things
Mhm.
around his own thought leadership. What do you believe the impact his presence is making on LinkedIn is having on all of his like endorsement deals and the things that he's a part of now off the field?
Yeah, I think that's an important area to highlight because it doesn't just build their personal brand and what they're known for when they kind of leverage LinkedIn in the right way and become a leading voice on the platform. It then amplifies everything else that they do. So if they are showcasing or they've got in their experience section or they're talking about those partnerships, those companies that they're involved in, or a foundation that they might support, if they've got that represented on their profile, they all start to benefit, right? Because the eyes then that are on his profile then go to all of those things that he's involved in, right? And the more that he shares in, again, a human way or a way that resonates with people, they will start to then go through that pathway of, hey, I've looked at his profile. Oh, I didn't know he was involved in this. Let me look at that, right? And so I think it amplifies everything else that they're involved in and all the other brands or partnerships who then benefit from their reputation, right? And their personal brand. And so on LinkedIn, the number one activity is people looking at people on LinkedIn and looking at people's profiles. The number two activity on LinkedIn is people looking at where they work, right? And looking in their experience section. So the follow through of someone being active on LinkedIn and sharing their stories or what they're involved in ultimately leads people to those things, which I think is, which is great to continue to kind of build and bring awareness to.
I totally agree. We're seeing even high schoolers now, start to talk with agents and get brand deals and do things just at a much earlier age. What advice do you have for this next generation of young athletes in terms of building out their personal brand and monetization and starting off on the right foot?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing a lot, right? With NIL and everything that's happening at such an early age. And I think those skills that young athletes are learning are so critical for every stage of their life, whether they make it pro or they don't make it pro, the work that they're doing with brands, the way they're able to kind of learn different businesses and be in rooms with executives and brand builders and talk about those partnerships. I think those are really important skills for a young athlete to kind of learn and how they begin to communicate about who they are, right? And what their brand is and who they want to be kind of known as or represented through. And So some of my advice would be start as early as you can, right? Start building that brand who is you and start to build those trust relationships, right? And don't just accept anything. I think you have to be thoughtful. You've got to be intentional about what you put your name on, right? Which I think doesn't happen as often as it maybe should. And you can be very intentional, even as a college athlete or a high school athlete, with who you partner with and who you work with, from the kind of the brand or the partnership side. And I think those conversations can start to happen on LinkedIn, and you can start to build that credibility really, really early. And I kind of talk to athletes, whatever stage of their career is at, about how important this is, right? It's never too early to start. Even if you're a pro athlete and you're in the middle of your career and you're focused in on that, you don't want to wait too long, right? Until you're not as well known, or you don't have a platform and you don't have the same access. And so how can you leverage those things in a very kind of intentional and relatable way to people, so that you're involved in the things that you care about and that you're passionate about? I think it's so important. So whether you're a young athlete or you've just retired, it's the same importance. It runs consistently through it, is that we've all got to build our own brand and kind of get to a point where we're doing the things that we love, right?
I love that. How can people work with you on doing this exact process that we've talked about today, to building that yourself as a leading voice?
Yeah, so I do kind of a lot of that strategy and that advising with people. It's definitely a partnership. So rarely do I get involved with something and just take it all over, because no one really needs to hear more from me. They want to hear from the athlete or the former athlete or the actor or whoever you are. People want to hear from you and engage with you. And so when I'm partnering with it's about how clear they can get on really what they want. And I think that's an important kind of through line,
Mhm.
is them understanding, what do I want? What do I want to be known for? And what do I want to create or build in sport, outside of sport? And then it becomes a lot easier to kind of build that brand or build that network, and it'd be very intentional. And kind of I just help then guide people through that process. An important part of it is the consistency, right? I think we all see people dip in and out of LinkedIn. They're very active for a couple of weeks, and then they go missing for 9 months, and then they come back and think, oh, I've got something to talk about again. I should promote this. And it's that consistent through line being on LinkedIn, and not always sharing content, but doing some of that network building, and who are you connecting with, what are you trying to do, what are you trying to bring awareness to. When someone lands on your profile, is it really clear who you are, how quickly you can build trust and credibility, and then how people engage with you? I think that's often the piece that's missing. Is you'll go to someone's profile and you'll be like, great, I've now seen who they are, but I don't know what to do next. So you just move on, right? And it's hopefully helping people guide them through that process of, I've gone to John's profile, I want to know more about what he does. So they go to my company page and then my website, and hopefully they engage with me, right? And you've got to give people, I think, a clear pathway, because you don't have people's attention span for very long, especially on a platform like LinkedIn. It's not as entertaining as TikTok or Instagram or X. So you don't have people's attention for very long. And so when you get them on your profile, hopefully you're helping them make that next action. So I help in kind of that process, as well as kind of helping them think through kind of that reputational capital. What does that mean to them? How do they build trust and credibility with people that they want to build with and surround themselves with?
And you're also available too to be hired as like a panelist and a speaker. You're working with some agencies, educating their teams. And I think you mentioned maybe working with some universities on sharing the
Yeah.
knowledge about getting started early. So I think that's
Ooh.
awesome too.
Yeah, that's been a real fun part of it, and doing things like this, with good people. It's always fun to have a conversation about this, because one, I think it's important. I'm also passionate about it, but getting to talk with lots of people, either a panel or doing webinars, is, I think, I find it fun. Not everyone finds those things fun, but yeah, I've got to do it with universities across the US. I've got to do it with Major League Soccer Players Association, FIFA, recently the Canadian Olympic Committee, and it's these environments that, if I'm honest, I probably never would have dreamed about being in a few years ago, until I became very intentional about what I wanted to do next. And so it's a real joy to be in conversations like this, because I don't think before I thought I would be, right? And so when you get to work with really talented people and people that are known for being amazing in different things, when you get to talk with them and work with them, you realize how human they are, and that they're just trying to do what you're trying to do as well. So yeah, it's a great part of what I get to be involved in now.
Well, something we ask every podcaster, every podcast guest we have on the Elevate Collection podcast is if our listeners could do anything to help move your needle forward in this moment, what would that be?
To move my needle forward, it would be if they know of people that need help in developing their brand, whether it's in sport or in entertainment, then to reach out, right? Because I think um, there's there's so much opportunity within this space, and I think we're very very early in it, because we haven't seen the switch over yet from social media sites like Instagram and TikTok and X to a place like LinkedIn, and being very intentional. And so, yeah, if anyone thinks of people that they think, "Oh, this person would be great for John," um, then I'm available.
There it is.
Thanks so much for joining us today, John. We are so
Yeah,
excited to share out this information. Firmly believe like LinkedIn is the spot to be. It's now my new favorite networking app.
amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Next time we'll do it in person, and have a coffee and chat, and that'd be great. But thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Well, we can't wait. And we'll share all of your contact information in the show notes below, how people can reach out to you and where they can find you. Thanks so much for joining the Elevate Collection podcast today.
Thank you.
John.